The clipboard slammed onto my kitchen counter with enough force to make my coffee jump, and I stared at the official-looking document that two men in hard hats had just handed me, informing me that my garage was condemned and needed to be demolished within 14 days. I am Paul Thornton, and I have been a state building inspector for the great state of Wisconsin for the past 18 years. My house sits in a decent subdivision called Meadowbrook Estates in Waukesha County, about 30 minutes west of Milwaukee. I bought the property 5 years ago after my divorce, looking for somewhere quiet to rebuild my life. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first: tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and families who mostly kept to themselves. Then the HOA changed management about 2 years ago, and everything went sideways. The winter of 2024 had been brutal. We got hammered with snow starting in December, and by February, my detached garage had taken some damage from the weight. The roof sagged a bit in one corner where the snow had piled up nearly 4 feet deep. I knew it needed repairs, and I had already made arrangements with a contractor friend to fix it once the weather broke. It was not dangerous, not even close to requiring condemnation, but apparently someone thought differently. I looked up at the two men standing in my doorway. They wore matching navy blue jackets with Wisconsin Building Safety Division embroidered on the chest. Their hard hats looked brand new, not a scratch or sticker on them. The older one, probably in his 50s with a gray mustache, held another clipboard. The younger one, maybe 30, stood behind him with his arms crossed. "Gentlemen, I need to see your credentials," I said calmly. The older man reached into his jacket and pulled out a laminated ID card. I took it from him and examined it carefully. The photo matched his face well enough, and the card identified him as Robert Hendricks, senior building inspector. The card looked professional, had the state seal, holographic elements, everything you would expect, but something felt off. "Mind if I take a picture of this?" I asked. "That is against policy," the younger man said quickly. I looked at him. "What's your name?" "Derek Martin, assistant inspector." "Show me your credentials too." He hesitated, then produced his own ID card. I studied both cards carefully. The fonts were right, the layout was correct, but the holographic seal on both cards caught the light in a way that did not quite match the legitimate state IDs I saw every day at work. "Who requested this inspection?" I asked. Robert cleared his throat. "We received a complaint from your homeowners association about a dangerous structure. We are required by law to investigate all such complaints within 72 hours. Which HOA board member filed the complaint?" "That information is confidential," Derek said. I nodded slowly. "And your determination is that my garage needs to be demolished." "The structural integrity has been compromised by snow loading," Robert explained, using proper terminology that almost convinced me he knew what he was talking about. "The roof truss system has failed, and there is imminent danger of collapse. We are issuing a condemnation order with a 14-day demolition requirement." "I see. And if I do not comply?" "The county will demolish it and place a lien on your property for the costs, plus fines of up to $500 per day." I set my coffee cup down and leaned against the counter. "That is interesting. Tell me something, Robert." "What section of the Wisconsin Administrative Code governs emergency demolition orders?" He blinked. "Excuse me, the Administrative Code. Surely you know the specific statute you are citing for this condemnation." "It is in the paperwork," he said, gesturing to the clipboard I had tossed on the counter. I picked up the document and scanned it. The form looked official enough, but the citation referenced section SBS 320.07, which dealt with electrical installations, not structural condemnations. A real inspector would never make that mistake. You know what, gentlemen? I think we have a problem here. I walked over to my wallet on the counter and pulled out my own ID card. I am Paul Thornton, Senior Building Inspector for the state of Wisconsin, Division of Industry Services. I work out of the Madison office, but my jurisdiction covers 12 counties including Waukesha, and I can tell you right now that these credentials you are carrying are fake. The color drained from Robert's face. Derek took a step backward. Now, I am going to give you about 10 seconds to tell me who put you up to this before I call the Waukesha County Sheriff's Department and have you both arrested for impersonating state officials, which is a Class H felony in Wisconsin. Wait, Robert said, holding up his hands. Look, we did not know, okay? We were just hired to deliver the paperwork and make it look official. Hired by who? Derek and Robert exchanged glances. Some woman from your HOA, Derek finally admitted. She contacted us through Craigslist, said she needed actors for a reality TV show prank. Paid us $500 each. What was her name? Karen something. Karen Kennedy, I think. She said it was all legal, just for a TV show about annoying neighbors. There it was. Karen Kennedy, the HOA president and the absolute nightmare of Meadowbrook Estates. She was a woman in her late 40s who had made it her life's mission to fine, harass, and intimidate every homeowner in the subdivision who did not meet her exacting standards. I had watched her reduce grown men to frustration and make families move out rather than deal with her constant complaints. Give me everything she gave you, I said. All the paperwork, the fake IDs, any emails or texts, everything. They complied immediately, clearly realizing they had stepped into something way over their heads. Robert's hands shook as he handed over a folder with additional documents, including text message screenshots on his phone that I photographed. The texts clearly showed Karen organizing the fake inspection, providing them with the fraudulent credentials and coaching them on exactly what to say. Get out of here, I told them. And if Karen contacts you again, do not respond. You will probably get a call from law enforcement in the next few days. Cooperate fully and you might avoid charges. They practically ran out of my house. I stood at the window and watched them drive away in a white pickup truck, not the state vehicle that real inspectors would use. Then I picked up my phone and started making calls. My first call went to my supervisor, James Rutherford, who managed the Southern District from the Madison office. I had worked with James for over a decade, and he was both a friend and someone who took violations of building inspection protocols extremely seriously. Paul, please tell me you are calling to say you will be back in the office tomorrow, James said when he answered. I wish. Jim, I have got a situation. Someone just impersonated state building inspectors at my house and tried to serve me a fake condemnation order. There was a long pause. Please tell me you are joking. I explained the entire encounter, sending him photos of the fake credentials and documents while we talked. His anger was evident even over the phone. This is not just fraud, Paul. This is impersonation of a state official, forgery of government documents, attempted extortion. We are talking multiple felonies. Who is behind this? My HOA president, Karen Kennedy. I have text messages proving she hired these guys and provided the fake credentials. Do you know who made the fake IDs? Not yet, but I will find out. I am going to the sheriff's department this afternoon. Good. I am going to contact the Attorney General's office too. They take this stuff very seriously. Impersonating building inspectors undermines public trust in the entire system. Keep me updated. My second call went to the Waukesha County Sheriff's Department. I explained the situation to the desk sergeant, who connected me with Detective Lisa Morrison from their fraud division. She asked me to come in that afternoon to file a formal complaint and bring all the evidence. Before I left for the sheriff's department, I decided to take a closer look at my garage. The February sun was weak, but the day was clear, and I wanted to document its actual condition. I grabbed my professional camera and my inspection gear, then walked out to the detached structure. The garage was a standard two-car building with vinyl siding and an asphalt shingle roof. Yes, there was some sagging on the northeast corner where the snow had been heaviest, but the damage was purely cosmetic. The roof decking had compressed slightly under the load, but the trusses were intact. I had checked them myself weeks ago. There was absolutely no danger of collapse, and the repairs would cost maybe $2,000 at most. I took dozens of photos from every angle, including close-ups of the truss connections and the roof structure from inside. Then I prepared a formal inspection report using the same protocols I followed for work. If this ended up in court, I wanted ironclad documentation that my garage was nowhere near requiring condemnation. The drive to the sheriff's department took 20 minutes. The main office was located in downtown Waukesha, a historic city with a charming main street and a mix of old and new buildings. I had always liked Waukesha. It had that small town feel despite being part of the greater Milwaukee metropolitan area. Detective Morrison met me in the lobby. She was a woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. We went back to her office, a cramped space filled with file boxes and a whiteboard covered in case notes. "Mr. Thornton, walk me through exactly what happened this morning," she said, pulling out a digital recorder. I gave her the complete story, providing copies of all the documents, the photos of the fake credentials, and the text message screenshots. She listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "So these two men, Robert Hendricks and Derek Martin, they admitted that Karen Kennedy hired them." "That is correct. They claimed they thought it was for a reality TV show prank. That is not going to fly as a defense, but okay." She made notes on her computer. "And you are certain these credentials are fake?" "Absolutely. The holographic seals are wrong, the citation on the condemnation order references the wrong statute, and these men are not in the state employee database. I can verify that last part through my office." "Do it." "I want official confirmation." I called James back and had him search the Division of Industry Services employee records. As expected, no Robert Hendricks or Derek Martin worked as building inspectors anywhere in Wisconsin. James emailed the official confirmation to Detective Morrison within minutes. "Okay, this is looking pretty solid," Morrison said. "Now tell me about Karen Kennedy and this HOA. Any prior issues?" I laughed bitterly. "Where do I start?" Karen became HOA president about 2 years ago, and since then, she has been on a crusade to fine and harass anyone who does not maintain their property to her impossible standards. I have seen her issue fines for grass being a quarter-inch too long, for Christmas lights staying up 2 days past her arbitrary deadline, for parking cars in driveways overnight, you name it. Is any of that legal? Technically, if it is in the HOA covenants, yes. But she enforces everything selectively and vindictively. People she likes get warnings. People she does not like get maximum fines with no warning. Why does she not like you? Because I called her out at an HOA meeting last year. She tried to fine my neighbor, an elderly veteran named Tom Perkins, $5,000 for having rust stains on his driveway. I pointed out that the covenant language did not actually support that fine, and that she was abusing her authority. She backed down, but she has had it out for me ever since. Morrison nodded. "So this fake inspection is retaliation?" "Absolutely." She wants to force me to tear down my garage, which would cost me $15,000 to $20,000, all because of minor snow damage that needs maybe $2,000 in repairs. Have you had any other problems with her recently? I thought about it. She has been sending me violation notices every few weeks. My mailbox was supposedly the wrong shade of black. My front door wreath was not allowed per covenant section whatever. All petty stuff that she invented. None of it held up when I pushed back with the actual covenant language. So she escalated to this. Okay. Morrison leaned back in her chair. Here is where we are. What she did is serious. We are looking at multiple charges. Impersonating a state official, forgery, fraud, possibly extortion depending on how we frame it. I need to verify a few more things, but I can probably get an arrest warrant by tomorrow. What about the 2 guys she hired? I will bring them in for questioning. If they cooperate, we might cut them a deal, but they still committed crimes, even if they claim they did not know. Fair enough. One more thing. Do you have any idea where she got the fake credentials made? That is a separate crime, and I want to nail whoever produced them too. No, but maybe the text messages have clues. She had to get them from somewhere. Morrison spent the next hour going through every detail of the evidence. She had me write out a formal statement and sign it. Then she made copies of everything and told me she would be in touch. I drove home as the afternoon sun started to sink toward the horizon. The winter days were still short, and darkness came early. My house felt empty and quiet when I walked in, and I found myself thinking about my ex-wife, Jennifer. We had split 5 years ago, mostly because of my work schedule and her frustration with my unwillingness to play political games in the neighborhood. She would have hated dealing with Karen too, but at least I would have had someone to vent to. I heated up leftover pasta for dinner and spent the evening researching Wisconsin law on impersonating government officials. The statute was clear. Anyone who falsely assumed to act as a public officer or employee with intent to mislead another into relying on that assumed authority was guilty of a Class H felony, punishable by up to 6 years in prison and $10,000 in fines. Karen had walked straight into serious criminal territory. The next morning, I woke to find my truck had been vandalized. Someone had keyed long scratches down both sides and slashed 2 of my tires. I immediately called Detective Morrison. "Cameras?" she asked. "No, I never installed any." "Guess I should have. File a report with the local police for the vandalism. I will note it in my case file. This could be more retaliation." I spent the morning dealing with the police report and getting my truck towed to a repair shop. The damage would cost about $3,000 to fix, and my insurance deductible was $1,000. I had no proof Karen was behind it, but the timing was awfully convenient. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Thornton." "This is Robert Hendricks. We met yesterday. I remember. What do you want?" "Look, I am really sorry about all this. The detective called me in for questioning this morning and I told her everything, but I thought you should know that Karen Kennedy called me last night." "What did she say?" "She threatened me. Said if I talked to the police, she would make sure I was arrested and charged with everything. She said she has connections and could make my life hell." "Did you record the call?" "No, but I have the number she called from on my phone log." "Forward that to Detective Morrison immediately. And Robert, stay away from Karen. She is going down and you do not want to be anywhere near her when it happens." "Understood, and again, I am sorry. I really thought it was just a TV prank." I believed him. He sounded genuinely shaken. Karen had manipulated him and Derek into committing crimes, and now she was trying to intimidate them into silence. That was witness tampering, another felony. The afternoon brought more drama. I received an official-looking letter in my mailbox from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, signed by Karen Kennedy. The letter informed me that I was being fined $500 per day, starting immediately, for maintaining a condemned structure on my property in violation of the covenants. The letter referenced the fake inspection from the previous day as justification. I had to admire her audacity, even as I wanted to throw something. She was actually doubling down, using her own fraudulent inspection as the basis for HOA fines. This woman had absolutely no fear of consequences. I scanned the letter and emailed it to Detective Morrison with a note. She is still going, witness tampering, and now this. Morrison called me within an hour. Paul, I have got good news. The DA approved the arrest warrant. We are picking her up tomorrow morning. What are the charges? 3 counts of impersonating a public official, 2 counts of forgery, 1 count of fraud, and 1 count of witness tampering. We found the printer Karen used for the fake credentials. It is a specialty shop in Milwaukee, and the owner is cooperating. Karen ordered the fake IDs and had them rush delivered. Is the printer facing charges? Probably. The owner claims he thought they were props for a movie, but he never verified that. At minimum, he is looking at being an accessory. When will you arrest her? Tomorrow at 7 in the morning. We are going to her house. Do you want to be there? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Karen's face when the deputies showed up at her door, but the professional part of me knew it was better to stay away. No, but keep me updated. Will do. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what would happen when Karen was arrested. She was the type who would blame everyone but herself. She would claim she was the victim, that I had set her up, that the HOA was just trying to enforce legitimate rules. But the evidence was overwhelming, and she had made it worse by tampering with witnesses. My phone rang at 7:30 the next morning. Detective Morrison sounded satisfied. We got her. She is in custody and being processed. You should have seen her face when we showed up. She actually tried to claim diplomatic immunity because she was an HOA president. I laughed despite myself. Did she resist? She argued and threatened to sue everyone from me to the governor, but no physical resistance. We searched her house with a warrant and found more evidence. She had a whole file on you, Paul. Photos of your house, notes about your schedule, even printouts of your social media. This woman was obsessed. That is disturbing. It gets better. We found similar files on 6 other homeowners in your subdivision. She had campaigns planned against all of you. Fake inspection orders, fraudulent liens, all kinds of schemes. We are going to review everything and potentially add more charges. What happens now? She will be arraigned this afternoon. The DA is asking for a $100,000 bail because of the witness tampering. Judge will decide. After that, we build the case for trial. How long until trial? Could be 6 months to a year, depending on how much she fights it. But Paul, the evidence is rock solid. She is going to prison. The arraignment happened at 2 that afternoon at the Waukesha County Courthouse. I decided to attend, sitting in the back of the courtroom gallery. Karen was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her normally perfect hair disheveled and her makeup smudged. She looked diminished somehow, less intimidating without her designer clothes and authoritative demeanor. The judge, an older man named Harold Fisher, reviewed the charges. Karen's attorney, a nervous-looking public defender named Mark Stevens, asked for low bail and argued that his client was not a flight risk. The prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named Rachel Chen, disagreed. Your Honor, the defendant has already engaged in witness tampering. She has shown a pattern of escalating illegal behavior and a complete disregard for the law. She poses a threat to multiple witnesses and to the integrity of this case. The state requests bail be set at $100,000. Judge Fisher looked down at Karen. "Mrs. Kennedy, these are serious charges. Impersonating a state official strikes at the heart of public trust in government. Do you understand the severity of what you are accused of?" Karen's voice was defiant. "Your Honor, I am innocent. I was simply trying to protect my neighborhood from a dangerous structure. Everything I did was within my authority as HOA president. That will be for a jury to decide. Bail is set at $100,000. You are ordered to have no contact with any witnesses in this case, including Paul Thornton. Next court date is March 15th for a preliminary hearing." Karen's face went pale when she heard the bail amount. I doubted she could afford it, which meant she would stay in jail until trial unless she could get a bail bondsman. I left the courthouse feeling a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. This had consumed my life for the past 3 days, and I knew it was far from over. But at least Karen was off the streets and could not harass anyone else. The next few weeks were relatively quiet. Karen remained in jail, unable to make bail. The HOA called an emergency meeting to elect a new president, and a reasonable guy named Steve Morrison took over. Steve immediately rescinded all of Karen's pending fines and violation notices, including the ones against me. "Paul, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize," Steve said when he called me. "We had no idea Karen was doing any of this. We thought she was just being thorough with enforcement. When we found out about the fake inspection, we were horrified. Did the board know about her files on homeowners? No. The police shared some of that information with us, and we are still processing it. Karen kept all of that secret. She was acting completely on her own. What happens to the HOA now? We are reviewing all of her actions over the past 2 years. Any questionable fines will be refunded. We are also rewriting our enforcement procedures to make sure nothing like this ever happens again, and we are cooperating fully with the prosecution." That was good to hear. I did not want the entire HOA to suffer because of one person's vendetta. My garage got repaired in March. My contractor friend, Dave Wilson, did the work for $1,800, replacing the damaged section of roof decking and reinforcing the trusses. The structure was solid again, and I had a professional engineer inspect it and provide a certification that it met all building codes. The preliminary hearing happened on March 15th. I attended, along with several other homeowners who had been targeted by Karen. The prosecutor presented the evidence, including the fake credentials, text messages, Karen's files on homeowners, and testimony from Robert Hendricks and Derek Martin. Karen's attorney tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial and that Karen had been trying to protect the neighborhood. Judge Fisher was not impressed. "Counsel, your client hired 2 men to impersonate state officials and serve a fraudulent condemnation order. She provided them with forged credentials. She then attempted to intimidate those witnesses. The evidence is overwhelming. This case is going to trial." The trial date was set for September. Karen remained in custody, having failed to make bail even with a bondsman. Her husband, a quiet accountant named Richard, had apparently filed for divorce within 2 weeks of her arrest. I felt a little bad for him. He seemed like a decent guy who had been married to a tyrant. Summer came, and life in Meadowbrook Estates actually became pleasant. Steve Morrison and the new HOA board took a reasonable approach to enforcement, focusing on actual problems rather than petty violations. People started having block parties again. Kids played in the streets without Karen calling the police for noise complaints. The neighborhood felt like a community for the first time in years. I spent my summer working my regular job as a state building inspector and trying to forget about the upcoming trial. But as September approached, the nervous energy returned. Detective Morrison had told me I would be called as a witness, and I needed to be prepared. The trial began on September 8th at the Waukesha County Courthouse. The prosecution had decided to proceed with all charges, and the DA himself, Brian Foster, was handling the case. This was unusual for what was essentially a fraud case, but the impersonation of state officials had gotten a lot of media attention, and the DA wanted to send a message. Jury selection took 2 days. The final jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from mid-20s to late 60s. They looked like a cross-section of Waukesha County. Some professionals, some blue-collar workers, a couple of retirees. The prosecution's opening statement was powerful. Brian Foster laid out the entire scheme in clear, simple language. He explained how Karen had hired 2 men to impersonate state building inspectors, provided them with fake credentials, and sent them to my house to deliver a fraudulent condemnation order. He explained how this was not just a prank or a civil dispute, but a serious crime that undermined public trust in government. Karen's defense attorney, who had been replaced by a private lawyer named Thomas Burke, tried a different approach. He argued that Karen had been acting out of genuine concern for neighborhood safety and had made poor decisions, but had not intended to commit crimes. He painted her as a dedicated community leader who had gone too far in her zeal to protect property values. The prosecution's case took 3 days. Robert Hendricks testified first, explaining how Karen had contacted him through Craigslist and hired him to play the role of a building inspector. He admitted that he should have known something was wrong, but had believed her story about a TV prank show. Derek Martin's testimony was similar. The printer who had made the fake credentials testified next. His name was Gary Wallace, and he owned a specialty printing shop in Milwaukee. He explained that Karen had come in with a rush order for 2 state building inspector IDs, claiming they were props for an independent film. He had made them without verifying her story and now regretted it. Gary had been charged as an accessory, but had taken a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand wearing my best suit and tried to project calm professionalism. Brian Foster led me through my qualifications, establishing my expertise as a state building inspector. Then he had me describe the encounter with the fake inspectors. "Mr. Thornton, when these 2 men arrived at your door, what was your initial reaction?" Foster asked. I was confused. I had not requested an inspection, and I knew my garage did not require condemnation. The damage was minor and easily repairable. "When did you realize something was wrong?" "Almost immediately." Their hard hats were brand new, which is unusual for inspectors who work in the field every day. Their vehicle was a personal pickup truck, not a state vehicle, and when I asked to see their credentials, the IDs looked almost right but not quite. "Can you explain what was wrong with the credentials?" The holographic seals were incorrect. Real state IDs have a specific hologram that catches light in a particular way. These were close but not exact. Also, the condemnation order they gave me cited the wrong section of the administrative code. No real inspector would make that mistake. Foster showed the jury the fake credentials and the condemnation order. "What did you do once you realized these men were not real inspectors?" I identified myself as a state building inspector and confronted them. They admitted almost immediately that Karen Kennedy had hired them and provided the credentials. "Did you believe they were complicit in the fraud?" "At first, yes. But after talking to them, I believed they had been manipulated by Mrs. Kennedy. They thought they were participating in a TV show prank." Thomas Burke cross-examined me, trying to suggest that my garage actually had been dangerous and that Karen had been acting reasonably. But I had brought my professional inspection report and photos, and the evidence clearly showed the garage was safe and only needed minor repairs. "Mr. Thornton, is it possible you underestimated the damage because it was your own property?" Burke asked. "No. I inspected that garage using the same protocols I use for any professional inspection. I also had an independent structural engineer examine it and provide a certification. The garage was never in danger of collapse. But there was visible damage, minor cosmetic damage from snow loading. Nothing that required condemnation or demolition. The repairs cost $1,800. Burke tried a few more questions but could not shake my testimony. The facts were too clear. Other witnesses followed. Detective Morrison testified about the investigation and the evidence they had found at Karen's house. Several homeowners testified about Karen's harassment and the files she had kept on them. Steve Morrison from the HOA testified about Karen's increasingly erratic behavior in the months before her arrest. The defense case was weak. Burke called character witnesses who testified that Karen was a dedicated community volunteer and loving mother. But he could not counter the overwhelming evidence of what she had done. Karen herself did not testify, which was probably smart but left the jury with no explanation for her actions. Closing arguments happened on September 15th. Brian Foster reminded the jury that intent did not matter when someone impersonated a government official. The law was clear. Karen had hired people to pretend to be state inspectors, had provided them with fake credentials, and had sent them to deliver a fraudulent order. Those actions constituted multiple felonies. Thomas Burke made a last attempt to portray Karen as misguided rather than criminal, but his heart did not seem to be in it. The evidence was too strong. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Karen showed no emotion when the verdicts were read, but I saw her hands shaking. Judge Fisher scheduled sentencing for October 20th and remanded her to custody. The sentencing hearing was packed. Several homeowners from Meadowbrook Estates attended, including elderly Tom Perkins, whom Karen had tried to fine for rust stains on his driveway. The prosecutor asked for the maximum sentence, arguing that Karen had shown no remorse and had abused a position of trust. Burke asked for leniency, citing Karen's lack of prior criminal record and her community service. Judge Fisher listened to both sides, then addressed Karen directly. "Mrs. Kennedy, you engaged in a calculated scheme to defraud and intimidate a member of your community. You impersonated state officials, forged government documents, and attempted to destroy a man's property through fraudulent means. When confronted with your crimes, you doubled down and attempted to intimidate witnesses. You have shown no remorse or understanding of the severity of your actions. These crimes strike at the foundation of public trust in government institutions." He paused, reviewing his notes. "On count 1, impersonating a public official, I sentence you to 3 years in state prison. On count 2, impersonating a public official, I sentence you to 3 years to run concurrent. On count 3, impersonating a public official, 3 years concurrent. On count 4, forgery, 2 years concurrent. On count 5, forgery, 2 years concurrent. On count 6, fraud, 2 years concurrent. On count 7, witness tampering, 3 years to run consecutive." That meant 6 years total. Karen's face went white. Burke immediately stood to argue, but Judge Fisher cut him off. "This sentence is appropriate given the nature and severity of the crimes. Mrs. Kennedy, you will serve a minimum of 85% of this sentence before being eligible for parole. You are also ordered to pay restitution to Mr. Thornton in the amount of $5,000 for damages and expenses. Court is adjourned. Karen was led away in handcuffs. I watched her go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. She had tried to destroy my property and intimidate me, and she had faced real consequences. But another part of me felt sad that it had come to this. If Karen had just left me alone, if she had been a reasonable HOA president instead of a tyrant, none of this would have happened. After the sentencing, several homeowners came up to thank me. Tom Perkins shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "You stood up to her when the rest of us were too scared," he said. "Thank you." "I just did what was right," I told him. Detective Morrison found me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "Justice served," she said with a slight smile. 6 years is a long time. She earned every day of it. And Paul, between you and me, we are looking at charges against 3 other HOA presidents in the county for similar schemes. Your case opened up a whole can of worms. Turns out Karen was not the only one abusing her authority. Seriously. Fake inspection orders, fraudulent liens, intimidation tactics. It was more widespread than we thought. But prosecuting Karen sends a message that this behavior will not be tolerated. I drove home that afternoon feeling like a weight had been lifted. The ordeal that had started back in February was finally over. Karen was going to prison, my garage was repaired, and the HOA was under new management. Life could get back to normal. November brought the first snow of the season, and I found myself watching the accumulation on my garage roof with nervous attention. But the repairs held perfectly. Dave had done good work, and the structure handled the snow load without any issues. The restitution money arrived in December, a check for $5,000 from the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. It more than covered my truck repairs and legal expenses. I donated half of it to a local veterans organization in Tom Perkins' name. Christmas in Meadowbrook Estates was different that year. The HOA actually organized a neighborhood party, something that never would have happened under Karen's leadership. Families gathered in the community pavilion, and there was a genuine feeling of warmth and fellowship. Several people toasted me as the man who had stood up to tyranny, which was embarrassing but also gratifying. On Christmas Eve, I stood in my driveway looking at my house and garage, both decorated with simple white lights. Snow was falling gently, and the neighborhood was peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from James Rutherford. "Merry Christmas, Paul. Heard you are something of a local hero now. Drinks next time you are in Madison." I smiled and texted back, "Just did my job. Merry Christmas." But it was more than that, and I knew it. I had stood up to someone who abused power and got away with it for years. I had used my knowledge and professional expertise to expose fraud and protect not just myself, but an entire community. That was something to be proud of. January brought news that Karen's appeal had been denied. She would serve her full sentence. I also heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her ex-husband Richard had moved to Minnesota and was trying to rebuild his life. The house they had owned in Meadowbrook Estates was in foreclosure. It was a sad ending to what must have been a troubled marriage. February marked 1 year since the fake inspectors had shown up at my door. I took a moment that morning to reflect on everything that had happened. The fear and anger I had felt that day, the investigation and arrest, the trial and conviction, the justice that had been served. My garage stood solid and repaired. My neighborhood was peaceful and well managed. Karen was in prison, paying for her crimes. The system had worked, not perfectly and not quickly, but it had worked. I went to my job that day as a state building inspector with renewed purpose. Every inspection I conducted, every property I evaluated, every homeowner I talked to, I remembered that my position carried real authority and real responsibility. People trusted that authority, and they needed to know it was legitimate and fair. What Karen had done was try to weaponize that trust for her own petty vendettas. She had turned something that should protect people into a tool of harassment and intimidation. In doing so, she had committed serious crimes and deserved the punishment she received. But more than that, her actions had reminded me why I did this work. Building codes and inspections were not just bureaucratic red tape. They protected people's safety, their homes, and their investments. When someone abused that system, whether through fraud like Karen or through incompetence, real people suffered. I made a mental note to be even more diligent in my inspections, even more careful in my evaluations, even more professional in my conduct. Because somewhere out there, someone might need me to stand between them and the next Karen Kennedy. Spring came early that year. By March, the snow had melted and the Meadowbrook Estates community was planning a neighborhood cleanup day. Steve Morrison called to ask if I would help organize it, and I agreed. It felt good to be part of something positive. The cleanup day was a success. Dozens of families came out to pick up litter, trim bushes, and spruce up the common areas. Kids played while adults worked, and there was a cookout afterward. This was what an HOA should be about, bringing people together and improving the community, not fining and harassing them. Tom Perkins worked beside me for most of the day, and at one point he said something that stuck with me. "You know, Paul, I have lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. The last 2 years under Karen were the worst of my life here. I actually considered selling my house just to get away from her. But you stood up when nobody else would, and that changed everything. You saved this place." I just exposed what she was doing, Tom. The system did the rest. No, you did more than that. You reminded all of us that we do not have to accept abuse from people in authority, that we can fight back when someone is wrong. That is worth more than you know. We worked in comfortable silence after that, and I thought about his words. Maybe I had made a difference. Maybe standing up to Karen had been about more than just protecting my garage. Maybe it had been about protecting the whole community from a bully who had gone unchecked for too long. Summer came, and with it came news that Gary Wallace, the printer who had made the fake credentials, had lost his business license and was facing federal charges for counterfeiting government documents. The feds had gotten involved because impersonating federal officials was also part of his operation, though not in Karen's case. His cooperation in her trial had helped him avoid the worst charges, but he was still looking at serious consequences. Robert Hendricks and Derek Martin, the 2 men Karen had hired, ended up with plea deals. They received probation, community service, and fines, but no jail time. Detective Morrison told me they had been genuinely cooperative and remorseful, and the prosecutor had decided they were victims of Karen's manipulation as much as accomplices. I ran into Derek at a hardware store one day. He recognized me immediately and approached with obvious nervousness. "Mr. Thornton, I just wanted to say again how sorry I am for what happened. I was stupid to believe her story, and I should have known better." "It is over now, Derek. You have learned from it." "Absolutely. I will never do anything like that again, and I am glad she went to prison." What she did was wrong. We shook hands and he left. I believed him. He was young and had made a mistake. But unlike Karen, he had taken responsibility and faced the consequences with honesty. Fall came around again, and with it came the 1-year anniversary of Karen's conviction. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story about the case, interviewing me, Detective Morrison, and several other homeowners. The article was titled, "How One HOA President's Fraud Scheme Exposed Corruption Across the County." The reporter, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, asked me what I thought the lasting impact of the case would be. "I hope it makes people more aware of HOA abuses," I said. "Not all HOA presidents are like Karen Kennedy, but some are, and homeowners need to know they have rights. They do not have to accept harassment or intimidation. They can fight back legally and win. You think the laws need to change? Maybe. Wisconsin could probably use stronger oversight of HOAs. But honestly, the bigger issue is cultural. People need to stop electing tyrants to these positions and start electing reasonable people who want to build communities, not control them." The article generated a lot of discussion in local online forums. Some people defended HOAs as necessary for maintaining property values. Others shared their own horror stories of HOA abuse. But most people agreed that what Karen had done crossed a line from aggressive enforcement into outright criminality. December brought an unexpected development. I received a letter from Karen herself, mailed from the Taycheedah Correctional Institution, where she was serving her sentence. The letter was brief and written in neat handwriting. "Mr. Thornton, I know you will probably throw this away without reading it, but I wanted to apologize for what I did to you. I have had a lot of time to think about my actions, and I realize now that I was wrong. I let my desire for control and perfection turn me into someone I do not recognize. What I did to you and to others in the neighborhood was cruel and illegal. I cannot undo it, but I want you to know I am sorry. I hope you can find peace, and I hope someday I can too. Karen Kennedy." I read the letter 3 times, trying to decide if it was genuine or manipulative. Finally, I decided it did not really matter. Whether Karen had truly changed or was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear, the apology did not change what had happened or the justice that had been served. I wrote a brief reply. "Mrs. Kennedy, I appreciate your apology. I hope you use your time in prison to genuinely reflect and change. When you get out, I suggest you never join an HOA board again. Paul Thornton." I mailed the letter and then tried to put the whole thing behind me. Karen would be in prison for at least 4 more years. By the time she got out, I hoped she would be a different person. But that was her journey, not mine. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued peacefully under Steve Morrison's leadership. The HOA focused on actual community needs like maintaining the roads, organizing social events, and keeping the common areas clean. Fines were rare and only issued for genuinely serious violations after multiple warnings. It was how an HOA should function. My garage remained solid through another winter and beyond. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the day those fake inspectors had shown up and tried to intimidate me. I remembered the anger and fear I had felt, but I also remembered the satisfaction of exposing the fraud and seeing justice done. The case had taught me important lessons. First, that credentials and authority mean nothing if they are not backed by actual legitimacy. Second, that bullies often crumble when confronted by someone who knows their rights. Third, that the legal system, for all its flaws, can work when people have the courage to use it. But maybe the most important lesson was about community. Karen had tried to rule Meadowbrook Estates through fear and intimidation. She had turned neighbors against each other and made people afraid to speak up. But once she was gone, the community had healed quickly. People wanted to get along and support each other. They just needed someone to remove the obstacle that was preventing it. 2 years after the fake inspections, I was promoted to regional supervisor for the State Building Inspection Division. The promotion came with more responsibility and better pay, but also with a reminder from James Rutherford. "Paul, you are taking this job because you understand what we do and why it matters. You proved that when you exposed the fraud against you. Never forget that our authority comes with responsibility. We protect people. We do not intimidate them. I will not forget, Jim, and I never did. I trained every new inspector who came through my division on the importance of integrity and professionalism. I told them the story of what had happened to me, how someone had tried to abuse the authority of our office for personal vendettas, and how that abuse had been met with serious consequences. Some of those young inspectors looked at me like I was exaggerating or being overdramatic. But the ones who paid attention, who really understood the lesson, they became the best inspectors in the division. They understood that our badges and credentials were not toys or props. They were symbols of public trust that had to be earned and protected every single day. Karen Kennedy was released from prison in December, 4 years and 2 months after her sentencing. She had earned early release for good behavior. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to Florida to live with her sister and was working as a receptionist at a dental office. Part of me hoped she had truly changed, that she had used her time in prison to reflect on what she had done and why it was wrong, that she would never again abuse authority or try to control people through intimidation. But another part of me did not care. Karen was no longer my problem. She had faced justice, served her time, and moved away. Whatever happened next in her life was her responsibility, not mine. Tom Perkins passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring at age 82. The neighborhood held a memorial service for him, and dozens of people came to share stories and pay respects. He had been a good man who had served his country and his community with quiet dignity. Karen had tried to destroy him over rust stains on a driveway, but in the end, he had outlasted her reign of terror and seen justice done. I spoke at his memorial, talking about his kindness and his courage in standing up to unfair treatment. I mentioned how he had thanked me for confronting Karen, but really, I should have been thanking him. His refusal to be cowed by her bullying had inspired me to stand firm when my turn came. Life moved forward, as it always does. Meadowbrook Estates remained a pleasant place to live. My garage stood solid and well maintained. My job as a building inspector continued to be challenging and meaningful. And every day, I remembered the lessons I had learned from the ordeal with Karen Kennedy. Never abuse authority. Always stand up to bullies. Protect the community. Maintain integrity. These were not just words or abstract concepts. They were principles that shaped how I lived and worked. And on cold February mornings, when I looked out at my garage and remembered the day those fake inspectors had knocked on my door, I felt grateful. Grateful that I had the knowledge to recognize the fraud. Grateful for the legal system that had delivered justice. Grateful for the community that had supported me and healed afterward. But most of all, grateful that I had stood up when it mattered. Because that single act of courage had not only protected me, but had protected everyone else Karen might have targeted. It had sent a message that HOA tyranny would not be tolerated, that impersonating government officials would be punished severely, that communities could resist abuse and reclaim their neighborhoods. The story of Karen Kennedy became something of a local legend in Waukesha County. New homeowners would hear about it and learn to be wary of HOA overreach. HOA board members would reference it as an example of what not to do. And state officials would cite it in training materials about protecting the integrity of building inspections. But for me, it was just a chapter in my life. An important chapter that had taught me valuable lessons, but still just one part of a longer story. I had a career to continue, relationships to maintain, and a community to serve. The past was important, but the present and future mattered more. 5 years after the fake inspection incident, I stood in my driveway on a beautiful spring morning, watching kids ride bikes and neighbors work in their yards. Meadowbrook Estates was thriving. The HOA was well managed and reasonable. Property values had actually increased since Karen's reign of terror had ended. My phone rang. It was a reporter from Milwaukee asking if I would comment on a new proposed state law that would increase oversight of HOA boards and create penalties for abuse of authority. The law was being called the HOA Accountability Act, and it had been inspired in part by Karen's case. Mr. Thornton, as someone who was directly affected by HOA fraud, what do you think about this proposed legislation? I think it is long overdue, I said. HOAs serve an important purpose, but they need accountability just like any other organization with authority over people's lives. This law will help protect homeowners from abuse while still allowing HOAs to function effectively. Would this law have prevented what happened to you? Maybe, maybe not, but it would give victims more tools to fight back and hold bad actors accountable. That is a good thing. The article ran the next day, and the law passed 3 months later with strong bipartisan support. Governor Evers signed it in a ceremony that I attended along with several other homeowners who had been affected by HOA abuse. Standing there in the state capitol in Madison, watching the governor sign the bill, I felt a sense of completion. What had started as a personal attack against me had become something bigger. A movement for reform, a change in the law, better protection for homeowners across Wisconsin. None of that would have happened if I had just accepted the fake condemnation order. If I had torn down my garage and paid the fines and kept quiet. But I had fought back, and that fight had mattered. The years continued to pass. I eventually retired from the State Building Inspection Division after 30 years of service. My farewell party was attended by dozens of colleagues, inspectors I had trained, and even a few homeowners whose cases I had worked on. James Rutherford gave a speech that got a little too sentimental for my taste, but that I appreciated nonetheless. Paul Thornton is retiring today after 3 decades of dedicated service to the people of Wisconsin. He has conducted thousands of inspections, trained hundreds of inspectors, and maintained the highest standards of integrity throughout his career. But he will always be remembered for the time he used his expertise to expose fraud and protect not just himself, but an entire community from abuse. That is the mark of a true public servant. Thank you, Paul. Everyone applauded, and I gave a brief speech thanking them for the years of cooperation and friendship. Then I went home to my house in Meadowbrook Estates, hung up my badge and credentials for the last time, and poured myself a whiskey. I sat on my back deck, looking at my garage in the fading evening light. That structure had been at the center of everything. The target of Karen's fraud, the catalyst for justice, the symbol of standing up to tyranny. It was just a garage now. 2 cars, some tools, lawn equipment. But it represented so much more. It represented the importance of knowledge and expertise, the power of courage and integrity, the possibility of justice even when the system seems stacked against you. I raised my glass in a silent toast to Tom Perkins, to Detective Morrison, to everyone who had stood with me during that ordeal. Then I drank and watched the sun set over my peaceful neighborhood. Life was good. The battles were over. Justice had been served. And my garage, that humble 2-car structure that had caused so much trouble, stood solid and strong, a testament to the truth that lies and fraud cannot stand against determined resistance. Karen Kennedy had tried to destroy it and failed. In the end, she had only destroyed herself. And the community she had tried to control had flourished in her absence, proving that people did not need tyrants. They needed leaders who served rather than ruled, who built up rather than tore down, who brought people together rather than drove them apart. As darkness fell and the stars came out, I went inside my house, content with the knowledge that I had made a difference, not just in my own life, but in the lives of everyone who had suffered under Karen's tyranny, and everyone who would be protected by the reforms her crimes had inspired. The story that had started with fake inspectors knocking on my door had ended with real changes to protect homeowners across Wisconsin. That was a legacy worth having, and as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I knew I could rest easy knowing the fight had been worth it.